The afternoon sunlight streamed softly through the large windows of the small downtown restaurant. The smell of freshly baked bread and sizzling dishes filled the air. Patrons were scattered across the tables, chatting quietly, enjoying their meals. The kind of calm, ordinary afternoon that seemed untouched by drama. But then, through the restaurant doors, Bruce Lee walked in. He wasn't dressed like a celebrity. No flashy clothes, no entourage, nothing to suggest he was anyone special. Just a simple t-shirt, jeans, and the quiet confidence of someone who had already mastered both the body and the mind. Most people glanced at him and looked away, some unaware of who he was. Life was carrying on, completely ordinary, except for one person, one waiter, whose eyes locked onto him in a way that would soon change the energy of the room entirely. The waiter was mid-20s, ambitious, and full of pride in his work. But pride, as they say, can easily turn into arrogance if unchecked. When Bruce approached the counter to order, the waiter's first glance was curious, then dismissive. Something about Bruce, his calm posture, the way he surveyed the room with composed awareness, seemed to irritate the waiter. Perhaps it was unconscious envy. Perhaps it was the human tendency to test anyone who radiates quiet confidence. Whatever it was, the waiter's mind instantly started judging him. "Table for one?" the waiter asked, his tone casual but with a subtle undertone, almost as if questioning Bruce's right to be there. "Yes, please," Bruce replied politely, his voice soft but steady, each word measured. He could feel the waiter's judgment like a weight pressing on the space between them, yet he showed no sign of tension. He wasn't here to confront anyone. He simply wanted to eat. But humans are unpredictable, and some cannot resist testing boundaries. The waiter tried to assert dominance, smirked, and leaned slightly closer. "Are you sure you can handle sitting here? This isn't exactly your scene, you know." His words were casual, almost joking, but the tone carried a hint of condescension, a challenge wrapped in polite phrasing. Bruce paused for a moment, studying the waiter with eyes that were calm yet piercing. Most people would have immediately reacted, anger, confusion, humiliation, but Bruce was trained, not just in martial arts, but in life itself. He understood that true strength often lies in restraint, and that the reaction to insult reveals more about a person than the insult itself. He smiled faintly, a smile that was quiet but not weak, and said simply, "I'm here to enjoy my meal, like everyone else. I hope that's okay." His tone was polite, but there was an undeniable firmness in it, like the edge of a blade cloaked in silk. The waiter's smirk faltered, just slightly, as he tried to maintain composure. He had expected a reaction, anger, fear, embarrassment, but Bruce Lee gave nothing. The calm intensity of his presence was unsettling. Customers nearby began to notice. A few heads turned, curious about the quiet tension building in the room. There was a subtle shift in energy, almost imperceptible, but it was there. For the next few minutes, the waiter continued his service, but each interaction became a tiny power struggle. He brought the menu with an exaggerated flourish, as if to assert his authority. He asked questions that were unnecessary. "Would you like the soup first? Are you sure you know what you want?" Every word, every gesture was a test designed to provoke a reaction. But Bruce Lee remained steady. Each response was calm, courteous, and precise. He did not let his emotions dictate his actions. He understood the psychology of confrontation. The moment you let anger take over, you lose. And the moment you show fear, you invite further disrespect. By remaining composed, he was already beginning to win, though few noticed yet. Meanwhile, the patrons who had been quietly eating were now subtly observing. They felt it. Something in the air had shifted. There was tension, yes, but also a strange magnetism. A man entering a restaurant quietly could disrupt the atmosphere entirely, not with noise, but with presence. Every movement Bruce made seemed deliberate, yet effortless. His posture, his calm breathing, the way he surveyed the room, all of it was a silent assertion of control. The waiter, realizing that his initial attempt to provoke had failed, decided to escalate. He raised his voice slightly. "Are you even old enough to appreciate the dishes here? You look small for this place." He chuckled, trying to mask the sharpness of his words as humor. Bruce's gaze did not waver. His eyes met the waiter's, steady, unwavering. And then he spoke, quietly. Size has never defined capability. And respect is earned, not assumed. Every word was calm, precise, and deliberate. Not a shout, not a threat, but it carried an invisible weight that filled the space between them. The restaurant fell almost silent. Patrons glanced at each other, sensing the intensity of what was unfolding. The waiter, for the first time, felt uncertainty creep into his mind. He had expected a reaction. Yes, but not this kind of silent authority, this quiet mastery of presence. The kind of power that does not need to shout to be felt. Bruce Lee then moved toward a table, his movements fluid and deliberate, never hurried. Each step conveyed calm confidence. He picked a seat near the window, sat down, and placed his napkin on his lap. The waiter approached again, this time with a faint tension noticeable in his shoulders, his previous smirk replaced by a forced smile. Bruce Lee's calm was disarming, mentally engaging every observer. It was the kind of energy that makes people rethink their assumptions, question their judgments, and feel slightly unsettled without even realizing why. That's the psychological power of presence. And in this moment, he was already teaching a lesson without raising a hand. As the waiter took the order, trying to regain composure, a few patrons discreetly pulled out their phones. Subtle glances, quick taps on the screen. Something about this interaction was compelling, magnetizing. People wanted to capture it, to witness it, because even without knowing exactly why, they sensed a story unfolding, a story that was about to become unforgettable. Bruce Lee sipped water calmly, his eyes observing the room, the waiter, and the subtle tension he had created. He knew the moment of true test had not yet arrived, but it was coming. And when it came, it wouldn't be about anger. It wouldn't be about retaliation. It would be about mental control, psychological dominance, and the quiet assertion of respect. And as the waiter prepared to deliver the first course, unaware that he had already been subtly disarmed, Bruce Lee's mind was clear. Every thought was precise. Every response measured. Every micro-movement intentional. This was the calm before the storm. The stage set perfectly for what was about to happen. And at that precise moment, the camera of human perception captured the unspoken truth. Strength is not in the fist, but in the mind. Authority is not in the voice, but in calmness. Respect is not demanded. It is projected silently, powerfully, inevitably. And that, dear viewer, is exactly what made what Bruce Lee did next so shocking, so mentally gripping, and so unforgettable that everyone present would carry it in their minds forever. The restaurant's quiet hum had shifted. What once felt like an ordinary afternoon was now charged with tension. Bruce Lee remained seated, his calm presence radiating silently, while the waiter's irritation began to surface in small, almost imperceptible ways, tapping fingers, forced smiles, and curt nods. It started with a small comment. "I didn't expect someone like you to order the special," the waiter said, his voice carrying just enough mockery to be noticed. Patrons nearby stiffened. A few exchanged subtle glances. The words were meant to sting, to provoke. Bruce didn't flinch. He simply looked at the waiter with a steady gaze and replied, politely but firmly, "I enjoy the flavors here, just like anyone else. I hope the kitchen can keep up." The waiter's smirk twisted into something sharper. He leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice to a tone only Bruce could hear. "You look out of place. Maybe you don't belong in a restaurant like this." It was more than sarcasm now. It was a challenge. An insult wrapped in casual phrasing, but everyone could sense the underlying hostility. The restaurant had gone quiet, not out of fear, but because people were instinctively drawn to the energy between the two men. Something invisible was happening, something that demanded attention. Bruce Lee remained still, his posture unbroken, his breathing calm, even measured. He didn't rise to anger. He didn't snap. Instead, he leaned slightly forward and spoke with the quiet authority that had made him legendary. Being out of place is a matter of perception. Respect, however, is universal. It doesn't need permission. His words hung in the air like a mirror, reflecting back the waiter's arrogance. Customers glanced at one another, some subtly taking out their phones, capturing the moment without being obvious. The waiter realized, perhaps for the first time, that he had stepped into a psychological arena far beyond what he had anticipated. But the young man's pride refused to back down. He tried again, louder this time, hoping to regain control. Maybe you think you're special, but no one here knows you. You're just another customer, like everyone else. Bruce's eyes, calm yet piercing, met his with the precision of a master. Perhaps I am just another customer, but the way we treat one another defines who we are. And respect is never optional. By now, the murmurs in the restaurant had grown. A few brave patrons whispered to each other, "Isn't that Bruce Lee?" Others didn't notice yet, but the energy in the room had shifted completely. People were drawn to the tension, mesmerized by the quiet dominance Bruce projected without moving a muscle. The waiter, sensing that the situation was slipping from his control, tried one last time to provoke Bruce publicly. He raised his voice slightly, ensuring that all nearby could hear. "You don't seem like someone who can handle this place. Maybe it's best you leave before you embarrass yourself." Now the room was fully aware of the confrontation. Phones quietly emerged. Some patrons were filming discreetly. The waiter's words, meant to belittle, instead revealed his own insecurity. Bruce didn't move, didn't shout, didn't even raise his voice. He simply maintained eye contact, calm and unyielding. His presence alone was enough to silence the room. Finally, Bruce spoke quietly but unmistakably, the kind of calm that demands attention. Humiliation comes not from others, but from letting their actions define us. And arrogance fades in the presence of calm strength. The effect was immediate. Patrons exchanged shocked looks. Some leaned forward in awe. The waiter's confidence began to waver. And while no one could yet predict what Bruce Lee would do next, one thing was clear. The young waiter had unintentionally stepped into a test of mind, patience, and composure, and he was losing. Have you ever been disrespected in public? Comment your country and city below. Let's see where people are watching this unfold. The tension in the restaurant had reached a near breaking point. Every patron was aware of the standoff, though no one knew exactly what was going to happen. Bruce Lee sat quietly at his table, calm as ever, while the waiter's smirk had transformed into something more aggressive, more desperate. His initial arrogance had begun to crack under the invisible pressure of Bruce's composed presence. The waiter leaned closer, lowering his voice, though now loud enough for the nearby customers to hear. "I don't think you understand this isn't a place for people like you," he said, his words sharp, cutting, and meant to provoke. "Maybe you should just leave before you embarrass yourself." Every person in the restaurant held their breath. They expected Bruce to explode, to throw a punch, to react physically. After all, that was what most imagined Bruce Lee would do. But Bruce remained still, his body relaxed, his eyes calm, almost unreadable. His silence was louder than any shout. It was a test, a challenge, and a lesson all at once. Bruce's wife, sitting beside him, noticed the shift in the waiter's tone. Her hand touched Bruce's arm, gently urging him to ignore the man. "Maybe it's better to leave," she whispered. Their children watched nervously, sensing the tension, but unsure why. To anyone else, it might have seemed that Bruce was at a disadvantage. But he understood something the rest did not. True strength is in restraint, not reaction. The waiter, however, was blinded by his own pride. He continued to escalate, pacing slightly behind the counter, his voice louder now, filled with irritation. "Do you even know how to behave in public? Do you think respect is earned just because you sit there quietly?" Bruce leaned back, maintaining eye contact with the waiter. He didn't move aggressively. He didn't shout. He simply said, softly but with authority, "Respect is not demanded through fear or insult. It is reflected in actions, in composure, in how we treat others." A hush fell over the restaurant. Patrons glanced at one another, leaning forward. Phones were subtly lifted, recording. No one wanted to miss this moment. Every subtle movement Bruce made was being scrutinized. Every word he spoke was being absorbed, and yet, the calmness he radiated was almost unnerving. The waiter's frustration now became obvious. His hands trembled slightly as he fidgeted with a notepad. He tried one final tactic, mocking Bruce's size, hinting at the assumption that he could be intimidated. "You're smaller than most people here. Are you sure you're not going to cause trouble for yourself?" Bruce's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, but with sharp focus. Then, with a calm tone that carried more weight than any shout could, he said, "Size has never defined power. Arrogance does not create strength. Only self-control, patience, and dignity do." The crowd reacted instantly. Gasps, whispers, and subtle nods spread around the room. Even those who hadn't noticed Bruce earlier now recognized the shift. Something profound was happening. The waiter's words, meant to provoke, had been deflected completely. His authority, which he assumed he had over the situation, was slipping through his fingers. And here's where the psychological trap deepened. People expected Bruce to escalate, to respond physically, to show dominance through action. But he didn't. He held the tension, letting the waiter's own insecurities unravel in real time. His silence and measured responses created a mental puzzle for every observer. What will he do next? At this moment, an engagement opportunity naturally arises for the audience. They are now emotionally invested, feeling the tension, imagining themselves in Bruce's place. You can ask them, if you were in Bruce Lee's shoes, would you stand your ground or walk away? Type stand or walk in the comments. Meanwhile, the waiter tried to regain control, but each word he spoke now sounded harsher, less confident. Bruce's calm mastery had already begun to psychologically dominate the situation. Every patron watching, some secretly filming, could sense that the power dynamics had shifted. The waiter was no longer in control. He was reacting, not leading. And so the restaurant became a stage, and the lesson began to unfold. It wasn't about fists, threats, or intimidation. It was about presence, mental strength, and the ability to control one's own mind in the face of aggression. By the end of part 3, the tension has peaked. The waiter is desperate, the crowd is fully engaged, and Bruce Lee's calm authority has mentally trapped everyone watching. Every viewer is now asking themselves the same question. What will he do next? The restaurant had fallen into a tense silence. Every patron, some aware of the subtle confrontation unfolding, others only beginning to notice, had their eyes on Bruce Lee and the waiter. The young man behind the counter was clearly struggling to maintain his composure, his earlier arrogance now replaced by irritation, doubt, and subtle panic. Bruce's calm demeanor remained unshaken, each word carefully measured, each movement deliberate. Then, from the corner of the room, a bystander whispered to the person next to him, "Wait, isn't that Bruce Lee?" The words spread like wildfire, quietly but with escalating intensity. A few heads turned, eyes widening in recognition. Phones discreetly lifted to record, capturing every micro-expression, every subtle gesture. Some patrons whispered, trying not to disturb the moment, while others exchanged excited glances, realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary, an encounter between legend and arrogance, poised on a knife's edge. The waiter remained unaware, too focused on his attempt to assert dominance to notice the murmurs spreading among the customers. His eyes flickered with frustration. How could one quiet, seemingly ordinary man command so much attention without a single outburst? The sense of control he had assumed at the start of the confrontation was slipping faster than he could grasp. Bruce, noticing the shift in energy, did not take advantage of the recognition to gloat. He remained humble, his calm authority alone demanding respect. His eyes scanned the room, acknowledging the subtle acknowledgement from those who recognized him, but he did not let fame define his actions. He understood that true power does not rely on recognition. It relies on composure, presence, and principle. The crowd began whispering louder. "That's Bruce Lee, the martial arts legend, the world-renowned actor. He's incredible." Suddenly, the waiter's insults felt smaller, weaker, almost foolish. The psychological weight had shifted entirely. Bruce had never raised his voice or moved aggressively, yet the room now clearly recognized who had the true power. The waiter, sensing the subtle change in perception, tried to recover. He cleared his throat and spoke louder, attempting to regain authority. "You may be famous, but everyone is equal here. You don't get special treatment." Bruce's response was calm, composed, and deliberate. Equality is not about fame. It is about respect, integrity, and how we treat one another. Every word carried weight. The crowd leaned in slightly, captivated not by the potential for physical confrontation, but by the mastery of presence, restraint, and mental clarity on display. Bruce's authority was now recognized, not through intimidation, but through psychological dominance, the quiet kind that leave a lasting impression. The waiter's frustration became obvious. His earlier confidence, his attempts to provoke and belittle, now seemed petty. Every insult he had thrown was reflected back in silence, composure, and subtle observation. He was losing control, not because of fear of violence, but because of the undeniable presence and mental strength of the man he had insulted. The restaurant itself seemed to shift around them. Patrons subtly repositioned to get a better view. Some whispered among themselves, realizing they were witnessing not just an interaction, but a lesson in respect, power, and humility. And in that room, Bruce Lee did not just sit. He commanded every attention, every thought, every expectation. At this moment, the audience, both in the restaurant and those watching later, was fully drawn into the psychological battle. It was not about fists, nor about loud words. It was about mastery of self, the ability to remain calm while everyone else reacted, and the subtle art of letting arrogance reveal itself. And the most important part, the recognition did not change Bruce's actions. He remained humble, composed, and principled. He allowed the waiter's ego to unravel on its own, without force, without aggression, and without the slightest loss of dignity. Have you ever been in a situation where someone underestimated you? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments. By the end of part 4, the tension had shifted dramatically. The waiter's confidence was eroding, the crowd's attention was fully captured, and Bruce's calm mastery had created a mental and emotional trap. Everyone now wondered what he would do next, and no one expected the lesson to come without a single strike. The tension in the restaurant had become almost tangible. Every patron was now fully aware of what was happening. Phones subtly lifted, recording, capturing each micro-expression, each flicker of tension. Bruce Lee sat calmly, hands folded neatly on the table, eyes scanning the room with that quiet, piercing focus that had always made him legendary. The waiter, on the other hand, was visibly trembling, not with fear, but with frustration. His attempts to assert control had failed. Every sarcastic remark, every condescending word had been met with calm precision, with a subtle authority he could not understand. And now, with the crowd quietly observing, the waiter's ego, which had seemed untouchable moments ago, began to crack. In a final attempt to regain dominance, the waiter raised his voice, gesturing aggressively. "You may think you're better than everyone here, but I run this place. You will not disrespect me." The restaurant collectively leaned in. Patrons exchanged subtle glances, sensing that the climax of this confrontation had arrived. Everyone expected Bruce Lee to explode, perhaps a verbal tirade, perhaps a show of physical power. But Bruce did not rise to anger. He did not shout. He simply took a deep breath, and then, in a calm but commanding voice that carried effortlessly through the room, he spoke. Respect is not granted through authority or intimidation. It is reflected in the way we treat others, regardless of their size, background, or your own assumptions about them. The words struck the room like a quiet thunderclap. Patrons instinctively leaned closer, their attention fully captured. The waiter's face went pale. His aggressive posture faltered. His hands hung awkwardly at his sides. For the first time, he felt the weight of the situation, not from Bruce's size, not from his reputation, but from his undeniable mental and moral authority. Bruce continued, his voice soft but razor-sharp in its precision. You see, arrogance is loud. Confidence is quiet. And when we try to humiliate others to feel stronger, we only reveal our own weakness. A collective gasp rippled through the restaurant. The patrons could feel the truth of the words in their bones. This was no longer a simple conflict between a waiter and a customer. It had become a lesson in human behavior, power, and integrity. The waiter's previous bravado dissolved completely. His smirk was gone. He opened his mouth, perhaps to respond, but no words came. He realized that he had been exposed, not by force, not by shouting, but by calm, controlled authority. His attempts at humiliation had been turned back on himself, and, in the process, he had become the subject of the lesson rather than the deliverer. Bruce, noticing the subtle quiver in the waiter's hands, leaned back slightly, his calm demeanor never faltering. Strength is not measured by how loudly we assert ourselves, he said. It is measured by the restraint we show, the dignity we maintain, and the respect we extend to others, even those who try to provoke us. The restaurant remained silent. No one dared interrupt. The weight of Bruce's words, his calm presence, and the utter collapse of the waiter's arrogance created an atmosphere that was both tense and electrifying. Every patron, every employee, was witnessing psychological mastery in its purest form. And then, almost imperceptibly, a few patrons began to whisper among themselves, pointing subtly at Bruce. That's Bruce Lee, the legend unshakable. Others discreetly continued recording, their fingers moving across phone screens to capture what was quickly becoming a viral-worthy encounter. For the waiter, every attempt to regain control now seemed meaningless. His voice was quieter, more hesitant, his movements uncertain. Bruce Lee had not only defended himself, he had flipped the entire power dynamic without raising a hand, without anger, without humiliation. The young man realized he had been outclassed, not in strength, but in mind, presence, and dignity. What do you think? Was Bruce Lee's calm or his words more powerful? Type calm or words in the comments. By the end of part 5, the waiter's ego had completely crumbled. The crowd had been mesmerized, not by a fight, but by the quiet strength of composure and integrity. Bruce Lee had shown, in one brief yet profound encounter, that real power is not in aggression or intimidation. It is in self-mastery, in restraint, and in commanding respect without demanding it. The psychological trap had been set. The audience, mentally and emotionally, was now fully invested. They were asking themselves, if I were in that situation, could I remain that calm? Could I command respect without fighting? The atmosphere in the restaurant had completely shifted. The arrogance that had once radiated from the waiter was now replaced with hesitation, doubt, and a subtle, creeping fear. Every patron present could feel it. The tension that had gripped the room earlier had now completely flipped. The psychological weight of the situation rested entirely on the waiter's shoulders, and he was beginning to crumble under it. Bruce Lee remained seated at his table, calm, composed, his hands resting lightly on the napkin in front of him. His eyes, steady and unflinching, scanned the room, absorbing every reaction, every flicker of emotion. He had not raised his voice, he had not made a single aggressive move, yet the entire restaurant now recognized who truly held power in the room. A few brave patrons whispered, try not to be too obvious. That's Bruce Lee, the world champion, the actor, the legend. Phones discreetly lifted, capturing every micro-expression, every subtle shift in the waiter's demeanor. Some customers couldn't resist speaking up, their voices low but firm. Sir, maybe you shouldn't treat people this way, one customer said, pointing subtly at the waiter. Another added, everyone here can see how respectful he's been. You've lost control. The waiter's face flushed crimson. His eyes darted around, searching for support from others, but none came. The room that had earlier held him in silent compliance now collectively questioned him. He had not anticipated the full social and psychological consequences of his actions. He had assumed intimidation and condescension would maintain his dominance. But Bruce's calm authority had turned the tables. Bruce leaned forward slightly, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute conviction. True authority is not taken through threats. It is earned through respect, integrity, and the way we treat one another. The words landed like a punch, not a physical one, but one that hit the mind, the ego, and the conscience all at once. The waiter stammered, tried to respond, but nothing came out that could reassert his control. Every word he had thrown at Bruce now reflected back upon him, exposing not strength, but weakness. The patrons, emboldened, began to speak more openly. A small group of customers nodded in agreement, while others quietly gestured to the waiter, letting him know that his behavior was unacceptable. Even some staff members, who had earlier been unsure how to intervene, now approached subtly, supporting Bruce without saying much, simply through their actions and body language. The waiter's desperation became visible. He tried to regain some semblance of authority, but each attempt only further highlighted his insecurity. He realized, finally, that he was no longer the center of power in the room. Bruce's quiet mastery, his composure, and his unwavering dignity had exposed the waiter for what he truly was, someone trying to assert dominance through arrogance and intimidation, and failing spectacularly. Bruce, sensing the shift, allowed a subtle smile to appear, a smile not of triumph, but of understanding. He had not come to humiliate. He had come to demonstrate the power of calm, the strength of presence, and the principle of respect. And now, the lesson was clear to everyone watching. Arrogance may provoke, but self-control commands attention and respect. The crowd began to react, quietly at first, then more audibly. A few murmurs of admiration grew louder, and a subtle cheer of acknowledgement spread through the room. "That's incredible! The way he handled that," whispered one bystander. Others nodded, some still filming, others simply witnessing, mentally storing the encounter in awe. Have you ever seen someone stay calm and completely turn a situation around? Share your story in the comments below. Meanwhile, the waiter's posture continued to falter. The humiliation was not from physical action, but from the undeniable truth reflected in the crowd's reactions and Bruce's calm demeanor. It was a lesson in how arrogance crumbles when met with quiet confidence, dignity, and composure. By the end of this part, the restaurant had transformed from a place of tension to a place of recognition. Bruce Lee had demonstrated, without striking a single blow, that true power lies not in aggression, but in mind, restraint, and the courage to stand firm while maintaining respect for others. The psychological victory was complete. The waiter was exposed, the crowd inspired, and Bruce's presence had left an indelible mark on everyone present. Every observer, whether present physically or watching the recorded moment later, would carry this lesson far beyond the walls of that restaurant. By the time Bruce Lee quietly rose from his seat, the atmosphere in the restaurant had completely transformed. The arrogant smirk of the waiter was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped silence that spoke volumes. The patrons who had once been tense and uncertain were now buzzing with admiration, awe, and a deep appreciation for what they had just witnessed. Bruce didn't gloat. He didn't make a show of his victory. He simply gathered his belongings, adjusted his jacket, and prepared to leave, every movement calm, deliberate, and dignified. His presence alone had conveyed more than any outburst or confrontation ever could. As he walked toward the door, whispers followed him. "That's Bruce Lee. He handled it so perfectly, calm, confident." Phones were still recording, and the first videos began to circulate on social media almost immediately. People outside the restaurant, in nearby streets and cafes, stopped mid-step as snippets of the confrontation spread online. Within hours, what had been a small, ordinary restaurant encounter became a viral sensation. The moral of the story resonated everywhere. Bruce Lee had not needed to fight, shout, or humiliate. He had demonstrated the power of calm, restraint, and dignity. The waiter, who had tried to assert dominance through disrespect and arrogance, had been humbled, not physically, but mentally and socially. It was a lesson in true strength, one measured by integrity, not intimidation. As the video spread, comments poured in from across the globe. People from the United States, the Philippines, the United Kingdom, and countless other countries shared their admiration. Many commented on the power of staying calm under pressure, the ability to command respect without force, and the lesson that arrogance often exposes weakness. Social media influencers and martial arts enthusiasts began analyzing the interaction. They highlighted Bruce's composure, his psychological strategy, and the subtle ways in which he allowed the waiter to expose himself. Each post, each share, added to the viral momentum. Millions witnessed the encounter, and millions more were inspired. Even mainstream news outlets picked up the story. Headlines praised Bruce Lee not only for his legendary martial arts skills, but also for his mastery of character and mental strength. Analysts described the incident as a modern lesson in respect and dignity, emphasizing how one person's calm authority could transform a tense, potentially humiliating situation into a teaching moment for everyone present. The waiter, meanwhile, faced subtle but undeniable consequences. Though no laws had been broken, his reputation was impacted. Patrons shared the story, highlighting the contrast between arrogance and respect. His own colleagues and friends began to question his behavior. In the end, it wasn't a punishment delivered by force. It was the natural result of mismatched character and integrity. And Bruce Lee? He quietly walked away, leaving behind a restaurant full of people who would remember this day forever. He had not sought fame or recognition in the moment, yet the world had taken notice. His lesson about restraint, mental mastery, and the power of composure spread further than he could have imagined. If you believe no one should be judged by arrogance or appearance, type respect in the comments. Share this story with friends who need to see what true strength really looks like. And subscribe for more incredible, inspiring stories just like this one.